Verse 8, for this thing I besought the Lord thrice, 3 times, that it might depart from me. He said he recognized it was evidently a messenger from Satan. And he says, I went to the Lord, said, Lord, Satan has sent a messenger to harass me everywhere I go. You know, think about how it would feel to be Paul. It would be humiliating. It would be distracting. Think of how hard it would make your job if you had to deal with all of this besides preaching the gospel. So he did what's a sensible thing. He said, I besought the Lord thrice that it might depart from me. Jesus' answer to him is remarkable and interesting, and it will help us. It helps us understand what he meant when he said, I can do all things, meaning I can face all these things through Christ that strengthens me. Here's a little more insight into it. The answer the Lord gave Paul in verse 9, he said to me, my grace is sufficient. In other words, my grace is enough for you. Listen carefully. For my strength is made perfect in weakness. Now let me stop right there. Can I paraphrase it? Can you grant me a little liberty to paraphrase it? Jesus is saying, my strength is made perfect in your weakness. Paul, in other words, the fact that these things show you to be weak and they humiliate you and they humble you and they show your weakness, my grace is able to work when you're weak. In fact, I could add, that's really what grace is. Grace is what God does for us that we don't do or can't do for ourselves. And let me tell you this also. As long as we think we're strong, as long as we think we've got it together, as long as we think we can handle it, we're not applying ourselves or letting God's grace apply to us. We're doing it. If we think we're strong, what we mean is we're strong in human strength. But our human strength, though, we have to rely on it for some things, it's got definite limits to it. And a better strategy is to say, I don't have what it takes, but God, you have what it takes. Jesus, you've got what it takes. He says here, my grace is sufficient for you. Grace is what God does for us that we can't do for ourselves, that we don't deserve for Him to do for us. It's what God does for us just because He's God. It's just God's action in our life. But the key thought for us is to realize that we can't do it, our weakness. Now, a moment ago, we sang a song. It said, let the weak say, I am strong. Remember that? Well, that doesn't mean strong in yourself. In another place, he said to the Ephesians, be strong in the Lord. Remember that? Have you ever heard that before? Be strong in the Lord. It doesn't say be strong in yourself. And we're really prone to this, especially men maybe, perhaps. Men, never want to seem weak. We never want to ask directions when we're driving. That really is true. When we're taking trips somewhere, and that's true. I'm very reluctant to stop and ask for directions. No, just give me, I can find it. And April's very patient, and she, what she'll say is, well, just give him a little more rope. And so when we're driving around somewhere looking for our destination, that's what they say. They go, just give him some more rope, Anyway, we're reluctant to admit that we're weak, but in life, we need to realize in the trouble that we face and things that we face, that especially insoluble situations. Well, here's what we tend to do when we face a problem. We tend to embrace it and turn it around in our minds. And we lay awake in bed at night and worry about it and thinking, how can I solve this? How can I figure this out? You know what would be good? And it's okay. If there's things we can do, we ought to do them, when the car is running on empty, I don't say, what am I going to do? I go to the gas station, But see, these insoluble things that cause us to lay awake in bed at night and worry, it would be good sometimes to say, you know what? And just make a prayer out of it. Lord, I'm weak. I haven't got the answers. I haven't got the power, but I know that you do. And so I just give this to you. And notice what he says here. My strength is made perfect in your weakness. Sometimes I can remember times in my own life as a Christian, we get very down on ourselves sometimes because we make mistakes and we don't do everything right and we fail. And we start meditating on those things. We get very self-critical, and that's not wholly bad. That's good, but sometimes it can be a very bad thing. And I can remember one time in my life, very vivid situation, sitting there just sort of really down on myself, thinking, I really have failure. I do all these things wrong, and I remember sort of just kind of meditating, mulling that over in my mind, and having this little thought come to my mind: yes, but my strength is made perfect in your weakness. Oh, that's a thought I hadn't thought. Maybe I don't have everything I need in myself, but He does. He can do it. See, that's the thought here. So Paul then says, most gladly, therefore, will I rather glory or boast in my infirmities or those things that show that I'm weak. In other words, I'm not ashamed of those things. He even says, I'll glory in my infirmities. Why? That the power of Christ might rest upon me. Now, who's better at handling life in general, would you say, you or Christ? Well, I'd say probably Christ is. So he says here, I'll just fess up and admit that I have weaknesses and that I don't have it all together. That I'm weak, so that why? So the power of Christ might rest upon me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities. This is really strange to us. We don't really understand it, but get the context, because that lets the power of Christ rest on me. Therefore, I take pleasure in infirmities, in reproaches, in necessities, persecutions, distresses for Christ's sake. Why? For when I'm weak, I would say it this way, when I recognize that I'm weak, then I'm strong. That's kind of a paradox, isn't it? How can he say, when I'm weak, I'm strong? Well, we sang it, let the weak say I am strong. Why? Because he's strong. That's why. I'm weak, but because of him, I'm strong because he's strong in me. I can do all things through Christ, which does what? Strengthens me. He provides the strength for what I need to face. Now, we've got the ideas, we've got the principles. Let's look at an example before we go today of Paul and his life. Let's just see how he put this, how he applied it. It's in Acts chapter 16. And interestingly enough, we started in Philippians. This is his story about his ministry in a place called Philippi. To give you the background, I'm going to start reading in verse 23. But let me give you the background. He has come to this place, Philippi, because he had a dream of a man of Macedonia, of which Philippi is the main city, saying, come over and help us. And he believed this was the Lord leading, which it was. And he went there to preach. And as they were moving around the city, it says back earlier, well, let's just back up a little bit. This is interesting to read. Verse 16, it came to pass as we went to prayer, a certain damsel possessed with a spirit of divination. That means fortune telling, kind of like a psychic or fortune teller or that kind of a thing. Possessed with a spirit of that, met us, which brought her masters much gain by her soothsaying. The same followed Paul and us. Luke is writing this, and so that's who us is. Followed Paul and us and cried, saying, these men are servants of the Most High God, which show us the way of salvation. By the way, that was true. Interesting, isn't it? That was true. And this did she many days. But Paul being grieved. You know, stop and think for a minute. Why was Paul grieved about that? She was not saying something bad about them. She wasn't telling lies. That was true. They were ministers of the Most High God. And they were showing the way of salvation. Here's why he was grieved. He was grieved because this woman was bound. This woman was tormented and bound by a spirit. It grieved him that this precious individual, this precious woman, for whom Christ died, is controlled by a devil. Even if she was saying something that was maybe beneficial to him. Maybe, you know what a lot of people say is, well, you just follow me everywhere. That's pretty good advertising. But it grieved him because he recognized this woman needs to be free. That, he didn't even address what it was she was saying. He turned and said to the spirit. See, Paul had some real insight. This catching up to heaven and getting unspeakable words and information, it gives a person a real leg up on the rest of us, a real insight. I can't say, honestly, that I go around town and I see somebody, oh, that person's got a spirit riding around on them. I don't see those kind of things, and I never really have seen any, but Paul evidently recognized that this was not a normal thing. He recognized this situation. And I guess when you recognize that, there's only one thing to do, and here's what he said. I command thee. He's not even talking to the woman. He's talking to the spirit that's controlling her, and tormenting her, binding her. He's grieved because that's the condition she's in. He says, I command you in the name of Jesus Christ to come out of her. And he came out the same hour. You know why? Because he didn't have any choice. When he was commanded in the name of Jesus, he had to act on it. Devils, demons are subject to the name of Jesus.